Thank you. Sorry, I don't think we could have done a more thorough job being prepared, but obviously.
You're gonna press it, or you want me to do it?
I think I understand, although I'm probably going to get in trouble immediately.
Let's just try one real quick. Run the timer, so move
that's,
it down
that's
here.
the first one.
Chris
Sure.
did lightly touch that one, and you're there.
Yeah, okay. That works. Yeah.
Okay.
Very light touch.
Yep.
I'm not known for that, but I'll give it a try. Such an honor to be here. My apologies. I am probably 2 or 3 shades of redder than I normally am. So no, I haven't been out in the sun. This is just embarrassing. But we're going to give it a try. I'll have to warn you right away that the pop-ups, the fancy gewgaws in PowerPoint are not going to work. So I'll tell you what you should see in some cases, but we just won't see it. I also wanted to say thank you very much to the Chico History Museum for inviting me back. Usually in my career when I've been invited back, it means that they're not done chewing me out. And so far that hasn't been the case here. So I appreciate it very much. And thank you all for coming. The loveliest of places is a quote directly from Bidwell. In his early career working for Sutter out of New Helvetia, he made a number of trips north into the valley to explore both the valley proper and the foothills. And during those explorations, he saw this place. He wanted it. It belonged to somebody else at the time. In fact, he helped put together the paperwork for that purchase, and then once he earned money in the gold rush, he was able to come back and buy it. Now, we are looking at a mansion in ruins, but I want to say that that mansion is just one of the many ruins on the property of Bidwell Mansion State Historic Park. And it's the most prominent, of course, but there are some really exciting and interesting buildings that existed there before the mansion. When Bidwell built the mansion, he deliberately erased all signs of the former frontier rancho, and so recovering that information on the nature and extent of those buildings requires some a deep dive into the record. And as you can see from the cover shot here, that includes archaeological work, some of which done by Professor Keith Johnson here, who has joined us. Some by Professor Mark Coda. I did follow-up projects twice. And then there's a documentary record that is spread all over the hill and gone. There's some stuff in Monterey and some stuff in Sacramento and stuff in the mansion possession and some of it's in private possession. And then the photographic record, a lot of which that we have inherited today, was put together by the Nopal family. And we accessed as much as we could. I think probably the most thorough inventory of all of those 3 dimensions of the record that had been done to date. And then I worked on the project for several years, finding points of congruence. And I'd have to say, the evidence-based approach in this work, it's not based on feelings, it's not based on personalities or discoveries or shouting down your detractors. It's based on the kind of activity that we might do if we're trying to position ourselves in the world using a compass. You triangulate. You take a shot to one thing. There's one line of evidence and then another line of evidence. When those 2 are congruent, you can feel comfortable, but there's still a weakness in that body of data. So I dig and dig and dig until I find that 3rd. And then I speak to the weakness in the data if it isn't there. And you'll see that today. I'll stack up information and show you how it works to find our way through this complicated story. So almost immediately after Bidwell got here, he began doing work. Oh, by the way, this publication that was available in the this is my initial publication on this. It was available in the visitor center. That's gone out of print, and they're not reissuing it. So I'm incorporating new material that I found in the 10 years since I published this, and I'm working with Arlene Ward, who will contribute a section on the native workers. Instead of, saying kind of nameless native workers or Indians or however the term was used, she has names, biographies, profiles of those individuals, which is really important because you'll see that the Mechoopda workers actually built the foundation of Chico. They're the builders of all of these things that we'll see today, and the operators of the rancho itself. When Bidwell established Rancho del Arroyo Chico, there were less than 14 Anglo people north of Neil's ranch, and so Bidwell was out here by himself, and it was really all about his interactions with the natives and his incorporation of native workers that allowed this thriving market and thriving rancho to develop. Bidwell did acquire this when he was an American citizen, but right up to the very end, he was a Mexican citizen, by the way. So that's the Rancho del Arroyo Chico. So it's vital and prosperous. I mean, he built it on the most heavily traveled. It would be like having a giant truck stop on I-5. It was a vital and a thriving institution and an important stopover. He deliberately erased everything. But what can we determine from the record? What does the record tell us about the nature of these features and how Bidwell's operation worked? So yeah, here's some of the oddball stuff you'll have to read through. I identified 16 constructed features I'll talk about today. You can't see, but it's 8 were constructed on or after 1848 and 8 built after 1852. So there are really 2 pulses of construction in there. And that earliest pulse, the Sutter-Lawson Road, which later became the Marysville-Shasta Road, is a constructed feature. And it's really the keystone for understanding Bidwell's operation. He didn't just build a rancho, he built the rancho on that major thoroughfare. And so understanding the development of that thoroughfare and how he took advantage of it, why it figures so prominently and what he did is really important. And so it is a major feature. In fact, the footprint of the Sutter-Lawson Road, which initially was built by Nicholas Algier from Sutter's New Helvetia operation to his Bear River Rancho, was initially built in 1844. So it well predates the gold rush, and it has a deep history, and it simply extended a few miles every year until it reached Lassen's, and that's why it's Sutter-Lawson Road. They pronounced it Lawson back then. You'll see Lawson on most of the maps. And then he built his own cabin, a clapboard house, and a stable shed. You can see they all ended in 1852 because they all burned down. There was a treaty grounds there in 1851. Very important treaty grounds, and it's an issue raised by the Mechoopda and other natives who were involved in those treaties in 1851 all the time, so it's important to know about it. A temporary adobe that he built after the loss of the cabin, and then the Chico store in 1852 and his old adobe with a lot of liquor bottle fragments that Mark and Keith found, by the way, which is interesting. We always find out what people were really up to in archaeology, And one of the tricks in that is you read the bio of a God-fearing Presbyterian, let's say, here we are, and it'll say, swear off everything, and then you dig the privy pit, the latrine out behind the house, and there's just layers of liquor bottles in there. It's where everybody, the reality set in the outhouse. Federal adobe, the Machuca octagon. This is, I think, one of the more interesting features, and something that nobody has heard about, but I found more than 3 lines of evidence on. It's quite specific. A granary, a huge barn that basically the back doors opened up onto Sacramento Avenue and straight down to Bidwell Landing. A blacksmith shop, and this was staffed by a Conway elder and others who actually, hammered out steel implements in that on a daily basis. The stables, a plank shed, and the Bahopke settlement that we've all heard about. So let's look at that Sutter Lawson Road. I think that he must have pronounced it Lawson. So it's jumped around here. Nicholas Algier built it to his mouth of Bear River Rancho by 1844. It was extended north to Hawk Farm that same year. That was John Sutter's Hawk Farm. Around the time that Bidwell, after a couple of years with Sutter and helping dismantle Fort Ross, then Sutter shifted Bidwell over to Hawk Farm to run it and build the adobe there. And as part of that, they extended the road. And then north to Neal's Rancho, which was established soon after, and on to Rancho de Lassen around 1847, 1848. Bidwell was not in Rancho Chico when that road initially was built all the way to Rancho de Lassen. But when Bidwell arrived at his newly acquired property here at Rancho Arroyo Chico, then he formalized that road. Let's see, I'm going to skip some of that. It's going to be really hard to read all of that. The early mapping is pretty profound. For example, this is a map done by Lieutenant Derby, a topographical engineer assigned out of the Pacific Division to explore California and make accurate maps. Accurate maps were a problem back then that could be used by gold seekers and military alike. And so he had a sextant. He took solar positions. They're quite accurate. I've run some of them and walked to the places, and other than the NAD 27, NAD 84, NAD 18th century or 19th century issue, which there's a correction factor for. They're really good. And you can see the Sutter Lawson Road extending up here. This is the Feather River, and the Sutter Lawson Road departs the Feather River. It would be just a little bit north of where East Gridley Road crosses the Feather River. And then the Feather makes an inward turn and goes out into the gravels there, and where it makes that inward turn is where the Lawson Road originally departed the Feather River and went directly across the plains. It went on the west side of Table Mountain and north at the foot slopes, the foot slope fans that exist through there, the kind of rocky and dry areas. And then you see it closing in on Butte Creek, where we'll hit Neal's Rancho. And then in 1849 it went straight through Chico.
Where on the map is East Gridley Road?
It would be right about here, just east of the Elk and Antelope. All right. This compiled a few years later in 1855 shows the road extending here all the way north, and Rancho del Arroyo Chico and his headquarters are shown prominently here. Here's Lassen. So it connected together the major ranchos along the route, and it was really used to transport goods back and forth. By the time the gold rush rolled around, then it became a major thoroughfare. And here we see in one of the initial plats of the Rancho del Arroyo Chico, that road passing right through it and right past the store. He put a store on the only road, you know, a long ways from any previous market. And so you can guess, I mean, here's a guy who figured it out. He got his gold before everybody else arrived, you know, in late 1848, and then he turned around and bought a ranch on the main road and put a store there almost immediately. Smart. And here's the rancho and the layout of the rancho headquarters, and I think it's 1858. It's been listed in various publications as 1854, 1856. I think it has to be 1858. I think that the previous reckoning was inaccurate, because you will see Bidwell's original brick federal/Georgian home site peeking over one of these buildings. It's difficult to see at this point, but I got the original and scanned the heck out of it. I think it was 1200 DPI, very high resolution scan, and you'll see the results today. This is sort of a linchpin for a lot of the work that we've done, although each building has additional photographs that fit in. I'm sorry?
Where is it?
Well, right here, you see that you're up at an angle, you're looking down on that fence. That's another reason I think it's 1858, because by this point we're looking at what would be second right here.
Second Street.
Or is it first?
First.
First, yeah, first coming in. Oh, that's right, it has that funny turnaround down this way. And so this road, I know, has been argued to be an original pathway of the Sutter-Lawson Road, but I'll show you here in a second that that's not accurate. I think this road almost certainly was part of a much larger corral, and would have angled off to the south, perhaps to one of the other ranchos down south. So you're up at an angle, probably on the second story of maybe an overlook on the second story or out a window of a building already constructed in 1858, looking across at the bridge. That bridge is our very bridge. I mean, our current bridge across Chico Creek is built directly on the footprint of this wooden pier and beam structure. And so it's possible to take this and calculate bearings to each of those places, and then actually do the physical triangulation, the engineering triangulation to the position of each of these buildings that I'll show you. Quite a few of them are visible in this picture, not at this resolution, but you'll see once we get down into those finer scans how they start to show up. Okay. All right. Why do I think that fence is not Potter's, and it's not, and it was constructed by Bidwell? Here's a letter from, oh, you can't see it, a letter from Bidwell to his major domo, Jim, at the time, instructing him to build a pasture fence 100 rods east-west by 80 rods north-south, and you think, okay, well, that explains that fence that we just looked at. But you know what? In 1852, this is 1852, 6 years before the image that we just looked at, and 100 rods in 19th century U.S., a rod was 16.5 feet. So we're looking at an enormous space here. So this is in 1852 is before the central street pattern of Chico was laid out, and Bidwell used that area for cattle and sheep pasture. And clearly in 1852, Bidwell was operating as if he owned, and I think he must have definitely owned, all the property south of Chico Creek, and bought from Potter, no doubt, or Potter's assignees. And you can see, it made me laugh when I looked at this, and it gave an insight to Bidwell as well, that the note on the bottom of this letter says build AB first, then build AD, and then build BC, and he's not going to close AD, or he's not going to close BC until, and you know, everything else is up to you. In other words, I don't care what color pants you wear, you know, or if you have a belt, or where you eat lunch. So he's very thorough. I mean, he gave very specific instructions. This is a great insight into the man. This is how big that fence that he described on his sketch, how big that fence was.
Oh, the yellow outline.
The yellow outline. It goes all the way down to the middle of the city square between 4th and 5th, and all the way out to Chestnut. So yeah, you are here in the middle of that thing. So it would have been pasture for critters, grazing. We found this buried in the State Library in Sacramento. Have been kind of lost. Nancy's probably seen it. She's seen everything, but otherwise it was.
I think it's one letter I have not seen.
Oh, ha! All right, I got Nancy. The rarest of rarities. Let's see. I've got to find. Let's see if this works. Oh, I'm back down here. Yeah, here we go. Notice the bridge is present in 1852, that wooden plank and beam bridge. And also he very specifically indicates the road goes along the north edge of that pasture. So the road, you know, prior to 1852, that road was smack down in the middle of where it is right now, and it is Main Street. And so the entire framework of Chico is built around this initial skeleton layout that we're seeing here. Okay, I think we looked at that. But we're back at this image again in 1858, and you see that the fence has been foreshortened. Clearly between 1852 and 1858, Bidwell has laid out the town plat. He's instructed his workers to shorten that fence and bring it up, and enclose only the portion of it directly along the creek. In other words, we're looking across the children's playground right here. And let's see. Yeah, there we go. So to enclose just this much area by 1858. So again, I'm confident that road came barreling through Chico at the angle we see it in today as Broadway / Main. Main for the most part is what we're looking at. The bridge was in place by 1852. I'll show you a travel log written in 1850 that said there was no bridge there, and it was a stream crossing, or a regular stream crossing. So let's see. Being as tentative with all this as I can be. Yeah. Okay. And also I wanted to show you on that high resolution scan what it looks like farther away, you know. When you're looking at the vista across the bridge and down the Esplanade, there's nothing. You can see the road wending off into the distance, and so really Bidwell's was the last stop on the route until you get to Lassen's at that point. And I could imagine you can see potentially some trees there in the background. The wonders of a scanner, and the oxen team is fun. Also, Bidwell in his habit of being Where's Waldo in all the photographs taken from this era, standing over there on the end of the bridge with maybe a top hat on. I don't know. The first Bidwell cabin and a clapboard house and stable and shed. I think this has a lot of text associated with it, so it may or may not show up. Yeah, Annie Bidwell confirmed that the log house that Bidwell initially had built, he did not build it himself, he hired a builder to build it. He was still out of Bidwell bar pulling nuggets out of the gravel, and hired somebody to go in there and build this cabin. It was right in front of where the mansion is today, in other words, in the direction of the esplanade from the mansion. And that ultimately he built stick-framed plank exterior sheds to attach to it that had different functions. I think Mike Magliari has indicated that he thought there was a store and granary there, and I think there's probably a tack shed use in there as well. So there are at least 2 or 3 different lines of evidence I've shown here. California Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Bidwell filed a claim with the California Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the loss of all the material when the hill Maidu came down and burnt this out. And that claim lists exactly what he lost in great detail, really precise. Another travel log from the Chico Weekly Enterprise. This was by John Waterman, who used to write under the name of Old Timer in the Enterprise. And his recollections are really precise, so there are 3 lines of evidence. So I put a star where I think that might have been. Waterman indicates that it was right next to the mansion entrance. Well, the mansion entrance, you can see, came directly into the mansion, directly towards the portico, from about where North Star Mill is today, directly in. So when he spoke to the mansion entrance, he was talking about that, not the kind of the thing that they have there now. And so the star is right where this place probably was. So now we're looking at 2 sets of ruins, the bridge, which is somewhere underneath the concrete, and this thing, which is probably still out there. I think that Mark Coda's excavation sunk a few units nearby, but he didn't dig directly in this spot. Now comes the tricky part. It's going to go. But the 1851 treaty that brought together Maidu tribes locally caused a lot of frustration because nothing was delivered, and ultimately the treaties were negated back in Washington, D.C. And the Hill Maidu were angry and came down and attacked both the Mechoopda workers and attacked Bidwell and his staff, Anglo staff as well, and burned down that entire operation. Stacks of lumber, and you see the list down there. Quite extensive. It's well documented, and as I mentioned, it's documented by Bidwell himself and his claim. Now let's look at those treaty grounds. What happened? Oh, okay. So what's? Did I hit the space bar?
Looks like Napa County.
The leprechauns. And I just tapped this. Is that right? Or I tap this. Work. Oh, what brings that preview up, huh? I heard something about a space bar. What was the space bar thing? The magic space bar. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I just need to go down and down and down. Oh, look at that. Oh, okay, right about there. Okay. So let's see where we are. Okay. Is this tree grounds? Ah. Okay, very good. Yeah. By the way, I went back to the original documentation of those treaty grounds and plotted out. They have angles and bearings from various features, and which I used to plot them in space on the ground. And you see here two of the treaty grounds that affected Maidu territory. One in Hill Nisenan territory. The corner of which is in Camp Far West, and then it went up the hill. Weimar Camp. Weimar was actually a very famous and important Nisenan leader. That name, the town named in his honor. By the way, Weimar, and so it's just almost an outline of major gold territory, but it was laid out before it was understood that that was the case. And you can see how big the territory was that would be allotted to the Maidu from the outlet. Almost, this corner here is almost at the outlet for the After Bay. And then north all the way up to essentially Mud Creek and a big slice in between. You can see all the names of the tribal centers that were represented by chiefs who appeared at the treaty grounds. Sunus is on Yanoseko, Yodak Bachi, which Keith sampled at one point when he was running the research program. This is right at the head of the Bayless Blue Gum Road where it connects with Highway 45. It's underneath the levee now. So you can see all of those tribal entities joined that event. Yeah, the Maidu participants listed out here. Important to know their names, and their names were written out. Those are all tribal chieftain names that existed in the Chico area, and they're tied to specific village names, which are listed there on the side. So we looked at Cheno. Actually, Cheno is where you dug. Cheno and Yolo Sa. Is that correct? Was the tribal chieftain who represented Cheno, and Cheno is the one that's right at the junction of Bayless Blue Gum and Highway 45. Wozencraft promised tons and tons of goods, listed out beefs and sacks of flour and all sorts of merchandise and food, and I think the assembled crowd, which was quite large, expected that the wagons that the military drove up to the place would contain all of these goods, and at the end of the treaty proceedings, which were held on or near the mansion grounds, there was a lot of pushback, especially from the Hill Maidu tribe, because the material didn't appear, and no material appeared after a year, and this is really the triggering point for the attack and the burnout. They were angry over the situation. Michelle Shover has talked about that in a couple of different publications, very, very thorough. By the way, in my original publication, I identified this as a photograph taken at Rancho Chico during the negotiations, and I followed a couple of other authors' leads on that, and it's definitely not. Unfortunately, this is a photo taken at the Nevada City Nisenan negotiation. In fact, the guy that you see, the two individuals that you see on the far right, H.B. Brown, the famous English illustrator who entered California and then proceeded up the Sacramento River in 1852, concurrent with the treaty negotiation, or 1851 and 1852, concurrent with the treaty negotiations, actually was there at the Nisenan tribal negotiation, and he illustrated it, four of the tribal chieftain participants. And you'll see here, let's see, the two men on the right, that's Bulak at the top right, and Takwala on the bottom right, are the two men standing in the back on the right. The patsoon that Bukala is wearing is identical to what H.B. Brown illustrated. You can see if you fix on his face, it's the same guy. He's even wearing the same ear ornamentation and necklace and the decorated stick through his hair bun is identical to what we see in the photograph. And the fellow on the far right there, very distinctive face, is clearly this man here on the lower right, Takwala. So I'm confident now that this does not. So we can walk away from that, unfortunately. The temporary adobe after the Hill Maidu burned down, the headquarters as they existed in 1852, Bidwell built a temporary adobe. Location unknown, but I think I found it. It's mentioned in the Sacramento Daily Union article as there's a single structure still existing, but one small house of prior date is still standing on the perimeter of the footprint of his operation. And what does that look like? Well, fortunately, a photo taken during the construction of the Bidwell mansion captured what appears to be a low-lying small adobe that fits the profile, fits the precise description that appears in Bidwell's account. In the lower right, you see the little structure right here. Oh, you can't see the close-up. It also appears in the original 1858 photograph. When you focus in on the 1868 photograph, you can actually tell the brick size is clearly adobe with a cedar shake roof, a hipped roof, and then a distinctive curved tree that has grown up since that structure was built and wrapped around the eave. And something hanging here, it could be a skin or an apron, I think, after Bidwell left quit using this thing as a residence. It was turned over to the cook, and it was the cook's site. And you can see a stove here and cap coming out the end. So I think that we're really looking at the cook's operation at that point. Let's see. Yeah, and then back to this photo, and you can see that same curved tree. There's the adobe is this low-lying thing, and the curved tree is here. Bidwell built an attached shed, probably a tack shed, right on the back of that. Okay, let's see if I can find my way out of here. Good. The Chico store and post office, built in 1852, again right on the road. This 1858 photograph, you can actually see the addition added to the front of it after probably 1854. Let's see. Okay, so we're back here. A number of different photographs have been taken this early enough that it predates the addition. You can see the Mechoopda lined up for goods and materials and food given to his workers. And here again a close-up. I estimate this is about 150 feet off the road based on the triangulation from that original point. I think we can pinpoint where it existed. I did take a remote sensing machine down in there to try to identify, but of course it's built on piers, which you can obviously see is partly on the edge of the creek. So you're looking at the creek side and about 1.5 foot clearance on piers for the slope down to the creek at that point. Again, Bidwell doing his, where's Waldo? The adobe, the old adobe. Numerous crosslinks to this, and you've probably all heard of that old adobe before, but there's additional information in records where you wouldn't expect it. The transactions of the California State Agricultural Society contain thorough descriptions of that adobe, including its dimensions. Supported on second floor joists extending out from the wall approximately 5 feet to form a veranda. We'll see all of that here in just a minute. Here's the State Agricultural Society detail. The 1871 bird's eye view, I think, is probably the most accurate as to its location. Of course, this is after the building had been torn down, but it appears to be accurate based on the triangulations that I was able to perform. This painting hangs in the visitor center, and I think it's been a reference point for most of the folks trying to figure out where that mansion was located. The irony here is that this painting was painted after the adobe was demolished. Bidwell, in his notes, gives precise dates as to when it was demolished, and that the pit that it used to contain, he had his workers dig out all of the adobe footings for the old adobe and carry them across the street to the folks who are building the new warehouse, which is now North Star Mill. So the adobe footings for this building are just across the street, not far away, under North Star Mill. And then he said, fill in the hole and plant new trees. And so the irony here is that you can see that entire center section looking towards the mansion is completely cleared out, and small trees are growing up. That is the position of the old adobe, and they've placed it to the left as an honorific only. So, because if they painted it where it originally was, you couldn't see the mansion from this angle. And here you can see the distance it is off the creek, the position, the bridge to the right. This is after the L-wing addition was added in. Good. Another photo of the same vintage. The Federal Adobe, very interesting building, and not part of our everyday knowledge about the mansion grounds. Is one of the 2 or 3 buildings that we really don't hear mentioned much. I will say, though, that if it was still in place, if it hadn't been demolished, it would probably be visited by every architectural historian in the Western Hemisphere because it was so unique. What do I mean? Well, a great deal of detail here again in the State Agricultural Society about the layout. We can actually see it in this 1858 photo. Where? I see the store, I see the old adobe. Look over the top of the store. Look at it peeking out in that high resolution photo. And it's quite clearly a Federal/Georgian structure. It has not 2 but 4 corner fireplaces and chimneys. It has a central, on the face facing the road, it has a central gabled dormer, in other words, angled at the top, that runs back in just short of the elevation of the ridge line of the structure. Here you can see it's angled. Another photo clarifies that relationship. It's really right next to the mansion. Oh boy, I'm going to hit something here. Okay, yeah, here's another angle taken, the same angle that I used to identify the the old adobe in the lower background, you can see on the right-hand side here, the crest of that Georgian or slash federal building, with probably paint added to the brick to give it highlights. And a photo that was in the possession of the Noble family that since has been donated to the Bidwell mansion, I believe, where you can see the mansion under construction, and Bidwell still is living in that federal Georgian mansion just to the right of the front of the mansion. So again, we saw the previous angle. You looked across the portico and there it was, and indeed that's precisely the angle. So it was immediately adjacent. Bidwell still living there in 1866, 1877 as the mansion was erected. Now, by the way, that same photo of the mansion under construction, you can see a couple of the Mechoopda workers up on the first deck. I grabbed a few photos off of the web so you can see what these things look like, and the distinction between federal and Georgian is pretty fuzzy, but Georgian typically has that a portico linked to that gabled dormer, an angled dormer, but the other structures that you see here are federal slash Georgian crossovers that lack that central portico. But in Bidwell's, that portico would have elevated all the way to this point, and then the roofs met, and there's nothing like that I could find anywhere in U.S. Architectural history records. So like I say, if that thing was still standing, it would probably be a major stopover point. Celebrated, I'm sure. Unfortunately, he tore it down as soon as the mansion was done, like everything else. The Mechoopda octagon, and I think we've had a long day, so I think I'm going to quit right here because the rest of it sort of peters out. But I wanted to get to this point because that Mechoopda octagon is iconic and it's unknown. You've never heard that such a thing existed. What do I mean? Mechoopda octagon, built by 1855, raised in 1865, along with everything else, to gentrify the grounds and remove all signs of his original raucous frontier rancho. What did it look like? A description here that we see starting up in this upper right-hand corner. This is a travel log written in the Sacramento Daily Union in 1855, a most unique building for the accommodation of those Indians who were constantly employed on the ranch, either as house servants, teamsters, shepherds, or vaqueros, all told about 30 individuals. This latter building is of adobes and consists of a large rectangular tower-like house, or as it is called in the familiar phrase, a powwow castle, 30 feet in diameter and 20 feet high, with two wings in L shape, 30 or 40 feet in length, running at right angles. The latter contain a number of sleeping rooms, so it would be sort of like your old standard 1950s motel. A number of different sleeping rooms for the occupants of the powwow castle. The castle part is one room from pavement to the roof, so a cylinder reaching up about as high as the ceiling, by the way, quite large, 30 feet across in diameter. Here the Indians build their fire in the center, so a big fire pit right in the center of that, and cook their food in their own way. The top is entirely covered, roofed over, which to the traveler appears like, and there are portholes around the perimeter on each angle of the octagon, 8 portholes on one on each angle of the octagon at the top of the walls, that appear to the traveler like the dark mouths of so many cannon positions. The whole of it painted white, and penciled in with red lines. The very design of this building, of the comment, it is easy for the careful observer to divine. Comports of civilized life are so harmonized with the peculiar customs of the California Indians as so to render him reconciled to, if not pleased with, his conditions. He cannot help seeing and feeling the superiority of his home over the wretched domains of the domiciles of the wild Indians, which, yeah, right. I'm sure that they were quite, felt exactly that way.
Could you tell us the date for that?
Oh, golly, it is 1855, I believe. It's popped out of the box, unfortunately. And another line of evidence on the same point. 25 Indians constantly on his place. He has a two-story. Well, I'm sorry. Wait. Let's see. Yeah, that's not in there. Yeah, a large triangle is used to call the Indians. 1 and 2 strokes. He has an Indian village not far from his residence, built of adobe houses. Let's see, one more. Oh, shoot, I just jumped the gun here, I think. Good. Okay, it's in here. It's in this photo again, in the high resolution version of it. He says it's not far from his residence, which at the time would have been the old adobe, so we can picture it probably at the back of the old adobe. He really made a deliberate effort all the way through his career to keep the tribal occupations away from the road, away from the corrupting influence of the road, so I expected to see it behind, and indeed you can actually see it in the span between the old adobe and a shed down the line. So you can see here the dark portals around the perimeter of the octagon, the sloped roof, a chimney coming out of the peak of the sloped roof to draw off smoke from the fire. And then angles of the octagon are visible, and then this long white line has to be the habitations attached to it. In the 1852 record, it was described as an L, but later records that I found in the California Agricultural Society transactions and newspaper travel log reports describe it as a cross. So he actually built more space as his staff increased. Oh, maybe that's a good time. Let's see. Ah, all right. So let's try this. I want to try going down. No. Well, doggone it. I have one last image that, if I can get it up, it shows you where the position of all of these things.
Use the slider, Greg.
What's that?
If you can use this, if there's a slider on the left.
Oh, is there a slider over there?
Should be.
Oh, right here.
That blue one?
Whoops.
That's not
No. Well, I'll tell you what, it's getting late. All of the buildings that we looked at here are directly on the mansion grounds. 16 total that make up one of the most important and vital frontier commercial operations and centers in the Sacramento Valley. And forgotten because I think Bidwell accomplished his intent, which was to erase the signatures of that part of his life. Difficult to say why. I mean, I think in retrospect, you could say that some of the events that took place there would challenge the moral posture that he took later in life. You know, the sale of liquor the nature of some of his relationships with tribal members and so on. He did demolish all of that and planted it in decorative vegetation before Annie arrived from the East Coast. It was gone. And by that point as well, Bidwell had removed his Mechoopda. The Mechoopda workers lived on site on the Rancho grounds, but their families and their relations lived in a Mechoopda settlement that was just upstream on Chico Creek, right underneath the junction of First Avenue back into Second before it crosses the bridge. There's a bank right there. It used to be, I think initially there was a big skating rink, also called the Octagon, maybe in honor, yeah. And there's an article in the Chico Record from the year that was built that said in the process of excavating out the footings for that Octagon, that new skating facility, that a number of Indian skeletons and beads, quote unquote, were unearthed. I took a walk over there and did find cultural material along the bank. It's heavily used by the unhoused right now, so I went early in the morning when nobody was awake. But at any rate, clearly that was the position. It's quite dark soil. There's a big midden buildup, and it's described thoroughly in a number of travelogues that the position occupied. Well, in 1863, when the Nomlaki Reserve collapsed and all the tribal members that had been transported up there fled the Nomlaki Reserve and tried to go back home to their original homes, they found them all colonized and homesteaded, and there were a number of conflicts that cropped up that resulted in deaths on both sides, and at the a number of the precipitating events for the Civil War were already taking place, and there were secessionists in Northern California who took it upon themselves to form militias and conduct raids and massacres. And Bidwell confronted them, was threatened at gunpoint. The military sent a contingent up. Bidwell said, "Well, I'll take care of a certain number of people. I can house them out at the Indian fisheries near Bidwell Landing, but I'm going to protect my people, the Mechoopda workers." And he removed them and their families from that original settlement that's under the bank and placed them in Bahopkey, which was behind the mansion. You may have seen the black marble circle that exists at the corner of Sylvania. That's not the location. Bahopkey was actually underneath Holt Hall, and it was disturbed during the construction. Again, I walked the creek there at the faculty glen, and I found cultural materials in the creek bed during the dry phase that we had a few years back. So Bidwell took that action in 1863, closed down the old village, moved it to Bahopkey in 1863, and also agreed to house and supplied beefs and sacks of flour to the people who were temporarily held by the military at Bidwell Landing. And of course, we all know the rest of that story. That's the core group that makes up the current Trail of Tears story and history, all taking place in 1863 at around the same time. So moved the village to Bahopkey. By the time Annie got there, she was disturbed by the smells and the sound coming from the village, and they ceded land for Mechoopda where Mechoopda Avenue is now off of Warner, and that's which ultimately was divided up by the U.S. Allotment Act and sold piece by piece. So the Mechoopda were removed from the story fairly early on. even though they had that key major role in the construction of everything that we've looked at here. And events really, I attribute most of the difficulties that occurred around that era between 1858 and 1863 to the same sentiments that were prevailing in the U.S. at large. That it was really secessionist versus more liberal leaning, and Bidwell was definitely on the more liberal leaning end of things. And it played out here in its own way. And instead of African Americans being the focal point, it was Native Americans here, but essentially the same thing. At any rate, all of those themes, I just want to point out, all of the themes that we've talked about, we're in Mexican California. Bidwell was a Mexican citizen. We're looking at a frontier rancho where he was one of a very few Anglos that existed in the North State at the time, and a lot of his rancheros were Californios, were former Mexican citizens that were adapted into the ranchos. A number of them went to work for the Anaseco Rancho too, by the way. So it was a multicultural context with all of the same cultural lineages and inheritances that now constitute our nature as Californians, and all drawing into that one focal point. And so there are a number of different stories that play out here that in my opinion, when the state considers a revised vision for Bidwell Mansion State Historic Park, I'm not sure that I would readapt and rebuild the gentrification. I think I would think very hard about the interpretive potentials of the material that we saw here today. And by the way, just a hell of a lot cheaper to build. Just think of, you could rebuild that store stick frame with the shiplap exterior and single hung 4-on-4s, right? There's an opportunity here. Dixie,
Yes.
And I discussed before I started, for an interpretive history comparable to what happens at Sutter's Fort as well. And I think that a real role for docents and participants to take a similar approach as we see at Sutter's Fort. So when I have an opportunity, I'm going to promote that in the future. Yeah.
And what is the current status of the actual structure now that they've cleaned it up so much on the outside of these?
Structure is not a good word for it anymore. Yeah. Yeah, and we don't know how much it would cost, but I think we all know that it will be plus millions, especially to reconstruct it to its original form. I don't think that there's any corner of the California budget that's going to equate the visitorship at Bidwell Mansion State Historic Park with that kind of expenditure. I think if we adopt a position right now and promote that with the Department of Parks and Recreation and emphasize the fabulous interpretive possibilities, all the dimensions of cultural diversity and frontier California and collaboration with tribes and the growing market, the economy that's visible there. I think there's an opportunity there that we just cannot miss. And by the way, this material is really not part of their thinking because it hasn't been really promoted and developed and distributed the way it should be. So we can now. Yes?
Of the various structures that were raised from before the mansion, like, what to you are like the key ones that would be the most interesting to you?
The two that I really, really love are the Mechoopda Octagon #1, which is fabulous. Think of all, the way all of those interpretive points converge on that. And the one that I think would be most important to the most scholars would be that Federal/Georgian adobe, but that's also kind of spendy. I think the store is obvious. I know Nancy likes the store and has talked about that. That original adobe is a good idea. The blacksmith shop, it's a pole barn structure with cedar shingles, and you can see, you know, that's a living history thing that would be just fabulous to. And by the way, there are a number of different items hammered out in that blacksmith shop that still exist in Chico. It's like pieces of the hooker oak. They're, you know, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a couple of them, and those things are around. Actually, a Conway descendant gave me an ash shovel that was actually hammered out by his ancestor in that. I would be happy to donate it, for example. Yeah, you had a question?
I was just going to say the reality of the city of Chico is based on what we...
And you know, they're doing a structural integrity study on it, which has not been completed.
Yeah, that has not been completed.
So they don't know. But to go over there and look at it now that they cleaned around it, I mean, if you think about the Roman Forum, we go there because it's a ruin. And I think the ruin of the mansion is pretty spectacular.
It is, there's no doubt about it.
In a conjunction with what you're talking about, the real history of the land, but there's a learning curve there to what happened to the mansion. He was the founder of our city, being a city employee for quite a while.
Absolutely.
So I mean, that's important, but I think that structure to me has a certain beauty where it is, and also the learning potential. Now my question is, when we did a memorial kind of to Bidwell Mansion here at the museum in June, we looked all over to curate things, and the Daughters of the Golden West, Annie Bidwell Parlor, had a painting of the Machuta church/schoolhouse that we ended up not using in our exhibition for a number of reasons, I guess. But you didn't mention that, and what was...
That's not on the grounds.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah.
Where was that?
That's right next to the CSU Chico Stadium grounds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had no idea where it was located. We thought it was on the...
Yeah, after 1873 or 4, I believe, when they deeded property over to the Mechoopta in that location, the Bidwells actually built a Presbyterian church, and at the same time, the tribes built a Kum, a large dance house.
Okay, so was it a schoolhouse and a church?
Yeah, and there's a Mechoopta cemetery on that property right now too. Yeah. Then many of Bidwell's original workers are buried in that cemetery, by the way. Yeah.
And the only other thing I wanted to say was City of Chico has not been a good keeper of history. You know, all the excavations that went on in the downtown area, they found lots of stuff.
Yes, indeed.
And at the courtyard off of Humboldt, there was a container that had all sorts of things.
Lots of Chinese stuff is what I've heard. And it disappeared little by little and is no longer there. I heard that's from some of the participants. You know,
it's a shame.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're still really in the business. I spend as little time as possible being a cop because the job is big. But the importance of heritage and its preservation can't be overemphasized. And most people feel like if it's there, you can take it. When you take it, it's like tearing the page out of a history book in a library and putting it back on the shelves. So that the next time we go there to read, that is missing, and some of those books that you pull out are just empty covers now. And that removes all the opportunity that we saw here. That convergence, the information content is no longer there. It's contextual in nature, you know. You really can't understand those things without viewing them in context. So, yeah, every opportunity I have, I make that urgent declaration, but at the same time, it's a losing fight. You know, if you look at YouTube, I mean, I click on archaeology things occasionally because I'm interested in what's going on in, you know, Egypt or something like that. But then they'll also start linking me up to all of these things where these guys going out and tobacco juice running down their chin, you know, hey, I found this, and I just think, you idiot. There's just, you know, the morality of it, is the corruption of it. I can't look at it anymore.
Well, the old city hall had in the basement all these Sanborn fireballs
Yeah.
decaying. So I took them to Chico Heritage.
Yes, indeed. That's
So
great.
they're at Chico Heritage.
And a selection of them are up there in the Northeast Special Collections too, by the way, which has been a great repository. I plan on putting all of my documentation from all of my work in that Northeast Special Collections, so that's available for students in the future. Yeah, I think Keith has done some of that as well. I know Mark has. So yeah. Any other questions? Oh, by the way, I just want to say yes. Let's have both. Let's have both, early and late. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.